righty. Are we good to get started, guys? Ah, perfect. Keisha, you can hear us.
Yes, I can finally hear.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us again for the Pando Days 24-25 project premieres. My name's Matthew Manos. I am the founder of Very Nice, a design firm here in Los Angeles, also a faculty member at USC and a longtime Pando maniac. Here co-hosting with my good friend Eugene Shirley, the 24-25 premiere events. And we're going to be trading off hosting. I hope that you all can make it to some of the future ones that are coming as well. You might see me, you might see Eugene, but you'll definitely see a happy face. And the program that we're really excited about today, that this represents of Pando Days, is really ultimately trying to make it easy for young people to make something happen for the world, for their communities, and learn something in the process of that as well. And in general, what we're going to see is 15-minute presentations from the teams, both in this premiere event and in future ones. And then we're going to have some discussion with a panel of experts, which we've got Keisha and John with us today as well. These premiere events are recorded, and early next year, the recordings, along with all of the project materials, will be posted on each team's webpage, which you can find at pandopopulous.com. So that'll be a really good source of inspiration and just documentation of everything that not only your school, but other schools have been working on. The projects are then going to be judged by a distinguished panel of specialists, and there's going to be honors and prizes and networking opportunities galore at the Pando Awards in April, which is April 27th. So definitely mark that on your calendars. And without further ado, let's get started for today. We've got CSU Los Angeles, led by Shika Upadhyaya, and the project is Pure Water, Shared Future, Equity-Centered Marketing Strategies to Promote Reclaimed Water in LA. The project takes on the challenge of getting Angelenos to drink and use water reclaimed from the county's streets and gutters. And it does so with an eye on equity-driven marketing as well. Sounds really fascinating, and because as water resources become increasingly scarce, we do all need to be looking for innovative ways to actually meet these needs. So, Shika, I'm really excited to see what you and your students have done. I'm going to throw it over to you all for a presentation, and then we'll come back to our panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew, for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here. And again, thank you again for Pando team and my students for this amazing project. Just FYI, this project is designed by a marketing professor and marketing students. So we're strictly coming from a marketing lens on what types of strategies will work to promote reclaimed water in LA. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I think you can see my screen. All right, so like Matthew mentioned, we are looking at the topic of making reclaimed water more accessible, interesting, and approachable for Angelenos interested in, in the topic of reclaimed water, but also from an equity perspective. And this is the general outline of today's presentation. My name is Shika Upadhyaya. I'm the instructor of marketing. I teach community-based social marketing, and my students, altogether, there were 16 groups across 2 sections. So our students worked on this project for a period of 16 weeks, looking at different data, collecting data, basically shedding light that perhaps the topic of reclaimed water cannot be understood, or marketing strategies cannot be designed without talking about water insecurity and water equity related issues in Los Angeles. So hence this project came out of from the students through their lived experiences and their research. So I'll be presenting insights from their projects, and I see some of my students are here. So perhaps they can bring in their thoughts as we go into the discussion section. Again, the partners for this project are Kelsey LA, Pando Days, and Metropolitan Water District. In terms of institutional alignment, it's very interesting because what we are doing in this project aligns with the overall mission of Kelsey LA, where we want our students to be involved in communities and work on projects that bring some type of positive impact in the community. So it's really cool to see that our students were able to utilize marketing tools to think through some of these ideas that impacted, impacts the local communities. In terms of county goals, we're looking at it from an equity perspective, so perhaps thinking of more inclusive programming and policies, and also broader UN SDG goals, where we're looking at providing quality education, more practice-based education for our students, but also impacting our communities through educational opportunities. So in terms of institutional goals, this project was a perfect fit. So I would also like to thank again MWD for their time and support with resources, especially Benita with her time and taking the time in responding some of the questions our student had. In terms of project development, I wanted to quickly highlight this because it was a very involved and immersed project for us, because we were planning and then the students met Eugene early on. We did some background research. Then we met Benita and John at the Blitz Days and Pando Blitz Days, and really thought through the project as across 16 weeks and came up with the strategies at the end. We also had the opportunity to do the site tour, so this was really cool because we got to go out there, and Mark Moss hosted us and provided more insights on the process, which really helped students to kind of think through some of the strategies. So overall, very immersive project where we started with secondary research. We got into conversations and we got to do the site visit and collected data and worked on some of the recommended solutions. Here I'll be presenting in a bit. Just to kind of take a step back and providing an overview of this project. This project is driven by this overall question of how do we market reclaimed water? How do we make it more interesting and cool for people? Generally, based on the research that students have done and also the literature, the challenge surrounding reclaimed water primarily stems in public perceptions, I would say misconceptions and lack of awareness on the technology that is behind the reclaimed water, right? So there's a lot of misconception and general mistrust around the process. If you look at it from a theoretical perspective, the idea of yuck factor that is driven by disgust, primarily because reclaimed water, and when people think about it, is associated with waste and human waste. So because of that product contagion effect or emotional contagion effect, a lot of people don't want to drink reclaimed water purely because of disgust. And aversion to new technology, again, from a behavioral perspective, someone who is averse to trying out new technology or ideas tend to also stay away from newer consumption practices, right? And also generally violation of social norms. Again, in some cases, people may not be willing to drink water from unnatural sources. So primarily because it's driven by technology, and hence they may not be open to trying out new ideas. So the literature behind reclaimed water basically shows that there may be multiple behavioral, psychological factors that may be impacting people's perceptions and willingness to engage and consume reclaimed water, right? So from a water equity perspective, and this is where our students' experiences came in, is you cannot talk about reclaimed water without taking the context into account, right? So if you look at LA, Angelenos have very diverse experiences in terms of water equity and accessibility and access to clean drinking water. And it could be financial constraints they may not have access to because of the neighborhoods they live in or infrastructure, or they may be lack of information, right? So they may be resorting to other alternative ways to ensure that they have access to clean drinking water. So looking at the context itself, LA is quite diverse. So the idea of just marketing reclaimed water cannot just happen in vacuum, right? So because people's perceptions and lived experiences kind of impact their willingness to consume reclaimed water. And and understand and be willing to listen and learn and be informed in the process. So taking into the literature, this is where the background research was done by the students. The two primary purposes that drove the entire project here is to understand the water-related knowledge, what motivates, what are some barriers that are present in terms of people's willingness to engage with reclaimed water, and what are some ways to kind of start that process so that we destigmatize, demystify reclaimed water and make it more approachable and interesting and cool for folks to, at least be willing to try it out. We're primarily, in terms of priority audience, we're looking at Angelina, anybody who's interested in more equity-focused conversations and also willingness to consume reclaimed water. With data, what we did was we looked at secondary research. So as you saw, we looked at behavioral norms and behavioral theories that kind of explain why people have disgust and misconceptions and mistrust and fear. And then we looked at the contextual factors perhaps lived experiences of stigma and inequity could really hinder people's willingness to engage with newer ideas or ideas that perhaps reinforce some of these experiences of stigma and discrimination. So in this case, consuming reclaimed water, right? So we really wanted to tease that apart. So the students did an amazing job. What we did was we reached out to Benita with a bunch of questions, and she took the time out to provide us with data and resources. So students took first few weeks to dig into that. And then we realized that we wanted to kind of go into these communities and also ask these questions to different demographics and people who live in different spaces. So students across all of these groups conducted 16 interviews with people who lived in underserved communities and also did an online survey covering 107 participants to really understand what the barriers and what are some ways we could potentially tackle those barriers. And I'm going to give you a very broad snapshot. I'll be happy to share a summary of the reports that students have done. Some of the key barriers that were identified through the primary data and as well as past research is there's this general health risk perceptions is people, yes, they are disgusted, but there's also, despite the understanding that there's technology behind it, there's general risk of perception that it's not healthy, it's not safe. I don't feel comfortable drinking it because it might lead to some kind of health related impact. So that's one of the biggest barrier we have seen. Other barrier that was interesting is mistrust, just generally not trusting of authorities and anything that is provided and handed down because of past experiences of perhaps discrimination or inequity or negative experience in general that kind of informs that, yes, there's a technology behind reclaimed water, but I don't trust the system, right? So that also seems to be fueling that conversation. And hence the equity perspective seems to be very important, is that broader experience is informing the lack of willingness to engage with reclaimed water. There's also stigma and existing inequities. So consuming reclaimed water, for instance, students found out that could reinforce some of the stigma for someone who lives in a neighborhood that reminds them of certain inequities in their day-to-day lives. And now they are being forced or they are being, kind of there is this conversation or drinking reclaimed water, and then there's this psychological connection of reclaimed water with waste and other non-traditional norms could trigger stigma and negative feelings towards just consuming reclaimed water in general. So again, going back to the contextual factor seems also very important when you're thinking of marketing reclaimed water. Another interesting thing that came up was terminology, because in parks and public spaces, we see reclaimed water being associated with potable, do not drink. It's only for irrigation purposes. So there is a chunk of the population that also seems to not understand when did that transition happen and how the same water can only be irrigated and now it's suddenly drinkable, right? So seems to be, there's a confusion about using the same term also, and just information gap. A lot of people didn't know about, reclaimed water and technology behind that. So these were some of the barriers we found out, and the motivators where people are also interested in conversations and consuming reclaimed water generally is from a cost savings perspective, where if it's going to save me money, perhaps I'll look into it. And if it's safer option, then I would rather not spend money on bottled water, which seems to be the common practice that a lot of these folks are doing, is they're spending a lot of money in bottled waters because it's safer option currently for them. So perhaps, cost saving measures, environmental concern is also another factor. A lot of the folks you engaged with also share that they are concerned about the environment. So perhaps some educational workshops and programs that kind of, highlights the cost savings perspective, but also the environmental aspect, benefits of drinking reclaimed water is also an opportunity. Incentivizing is also another factor. Rebates, gift cards, vouchers, some form of incentivization, either monetary or non-monetary, could also be another approach. The infrastructure and community-based programs is another big part, is where a lot of people are not happy with the water-related infrastructure. So if perhaps just marketing reclaimed water may not be enough in certain communities, there needs to be a follow-up kind of a program that leads to some kind of, a bigger renovation of current water-related infrastructure in certain communities. So that's also another key theme that emerged in terms of what could motivate folks to engage, drink reclaimed water. So these are the barriers and some motivators. So the students took these broader themes into account and proposed 3 broad recommendations. There are other really amazing recommendations. So for the purpose of the presentation, I'm just condensing it into 3. And the students who had included these topics in their reports are also present. So maybe in discussion section, they can go into the details of it. So number 1 is rebranding, is also one of the interesting, unexpected things that came up, is perhaps people are not open to drinking reclaimed water because you should not be calling it a reclaimed water, because you're using the same term to say it's only for irrigation, and then you're associating it with waste and many other things that are not normal currently, right? So, and then now you're telling me it's drinkable, right? So perhaps there needs to be rethinking, rebranding of reclaimed water with a new name. And one of the groups suggested New Drop as a way of rebranding the term reclaimed water itself, to primarily highlight the technology innovation behind it, and also the sustainability, environmental concepts that kind of drive drinkable reclaimed water, right? So again, the rebranding was one of the key areas that many groups suggested, is perhaps we need to rethink and reframe what reclaimed water means in the minds of the folks. Because essentially in commercial marketing, rebranding is such a common way of repositioning a brand, a product in the minds of the consumer. And that's what essentially we're proposing, is we should reposition, rebrand the concept of reclaimed water in the mind of the end users. Recommendation number 2 is storytelling, and not just in the form of reclaimed water is good or it's clean, but detailed, engaged, vivid, interactive content that showcases the refinement process, the environmental benefits, the cost savings, and different incentives, right? So when the students went to the site tour, it was eye-opening for many to see that process and then realize it's actually very clean. And I didn't know that it's actually very clean. Now I'm more than willing to at least try it out or taste it, right? Because now I see that it's very clean. So perhaps bringing that to the forefront and showing the technology behind it could also in a more vivid way could also be one way to tell a story about the technology behind reclaimed water. Partnerships with bloggers. I think it's just social media influencers, especially those who have current content on sustainability, celebrities, public personalities, bigger events could also be another option. Um, However, I think one of the suggestions students gave was not just say that, oh, it's clean, there's a technology behind it, but it show that they are drinking it or using it in their day-to-day life, so it normalizes the consumption of reclaimed water. So normalizing consumption of reclaimed water through these social media influencers or perhaps bigger personalities could also be another way in pushing that idea of this safety and technology behind reclaimed water. And finally, community engagement, which is a consistent theme that came across all 16 groups, was the idea of that the marketing campaign on reclaimed water needs to be supplemented with active engagement in the communities, right? So uh, in the form of having pop-up stations where people can go and try it out, taste it, and it's not just something that it's a foreign concept, and then they are just expected to go and drink, or they have the option to drink reclaimed water, but have choices and options and opportunities to try it out before they make that commitment to buy it or drink it or use it in their day-to-day lives. Workshops and demos, this was also another key theme that students suggested, was in addition to the overall marketing of the reclaimed water, there needs to be active engagement with educational institutions, organizations, perhaps churches and local community centers, where we are talking about reclaimed water, the science behind it, the environmental impact, and perhaps if there are incentives behind that, right? So again, engagement in the community. Education materials and community-based workshops. Understanding that there are language barriers, not everyone understands reclaimed water in the same way. So especially in LA, it's an immigrant community. Folks come from different countries with different types of relationship with water, right? So expecting them to understand reclaimed water in the way we want to, it's probably not going to happen. It's not going to translate in the same way, right? So we need to understand what barriers, cultural, language, what types of barriers are there to accurately, communicate the benefits and the science behind reclaimed water. Also seems to be very important. Generational component is also something that came up, was different generations talk about water differently and reclaimed water differently. So perhaps we also need to think about it in that level, is how do we bridge the generational divide so there are the barriers to adoption of reclaimed water is minimized. And also other fun contests and programs and incentives to make it fun and interesting, exciting to consume reclaimed water could potentially kind of minimize the barrier. So overall, what we found out is equity conversations or equity-focused marketing approaches to the adoption of reclaimed water can only happen if we truly supplement, normalization of reclaimed water consumption or consumption of reclaimed water with community-driven programs, and also being sensitive to the lived experiences of those who end up using these products that we are proposing. But that's all we have. I will be happy to take any questions, and my students are here, so they'll be happy to provide more context on some of these ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shika and team. Amazing work. It's really interesting to see this from that standpoint of marketing and just how true that is of the perception and how limiting that can be to any kind of change. I also think, for the students, this kind of challenge is something that you see in a lot of spaces too. We saw this in COVID times. We see this in misinformation in media. We see a lot of things around trust as a core pillar. And there's a lot you can transfer from what you learned here to other things too, which I think is very exciting. And of course, we also have our amazing panel with us today. We've got John and Keisha. We're going to chat for 20 to 30 minutes, and this is going to be, again, informal, discussing the project, things that stood out, how you might assess this. Are there any kind of questions that you have, places that this could go, etc. Keisha, we're excited to have you today. She is Director of Innovation at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, a Berkeley undergrad, and a law degree from UCLA. And her job is to identify new strategies, business opportunities, and technologies that can lead to innovation and consequently some growth. And I'm sure that she's using reclaimed water or seeing reclaimed water as important to LA's future as well. And then returning, we have John Bielenberg. John is Pando's founding creative director and has long sat on the board. He's a legend in the Design for Good movement and once wrote a book hoping to shake up the status quo called Think Wrong. So, John, always good to see you, and Keisha, what a wonderful treat to meet as well. I figure, Keisha, why don't we have you start us off with this Q&A? Again, any kind of reactions or questions that have come up, and then John will throw it over to you from there.
Well, thank you and good afternoon, Shika and students. It was funny as I was listening to the presentation, and when I first started with the Department of Water and Power, I had actually started with Mayor Villaraigosa a long time ago. But I think we were coming off of then, we had a very bad marketing experience where we were doing toilet to tap, which didn't go over very well. We tried to move on to showers to flowers a little bit better. I like the equity approach. One of my biggest fears, too, equity means a lot to me, obviously. One of my biggest fears is making sure that our underserved communities don't feel like we're trying to give them the worst of the worst and making sure they understand why we're doing some of the things that we're doing. And I remember joking with my kids and telling them, guess what? There is no new water. Every drop of water that we have has been through a process, has been through something. And that lovely water that comes from up in the mountains somewhere, where do you think the animals go to the bathroom? So I need people to kind of get that out of the head. I think that we at DWP, and I would suspect MET and all of the MET member agencies, we do a really, really good job of purifying the water to the greatest extent possible. Our marketing, yeah, kind of leaves a lot of room to be desired. So I like the approach that you've taken. The other thing that I think is really key for me is sometimes we sit in our ivory towers and we pretend to know how our customers are going to receive the information without having their lived experience. So, if anything, I'm always an advocate for asking the folks who are trying to get the information to how they're going to receive it and what's a better way to translate it. What does that look like? What does it look like when they're hearing it? So for me, it's definitely interesting. It's definitely a discussion I would want to have with our marketing folks. Again, we sit in an ivory tower and we're not always the best at relaying that information. And I think the argument that we always want to make is we're going to serve you the cleanest and the most pure water available. But I want for everyone to understand there is no new water. So it's all been treated, it's all been through something.
Yeah, that's such an eye-opening, sentiment for people to, I guess, to be a little corny to soak in, right? With just the reality of water. Um, Something that I am kind of curious about. I mean, there's really two things that come to mind with the world that you're seeing at LADWP, and when it comes to messaging, LA is a real big, real diverse community. And, one message doesn't necessarily work for everyone, especially to the point of equity. And so, something I'm curious is, do you see maybe a possibility of this being a campaign that's flexible? Is that something that would be, welcomed in the LADWP context versus a set message that they might put forward.
I think that flexibility is definitely a possibility. This would be a discussion I would like to have again with our comms team. Um, we've done something similar, for example, with another organization trying to figure out how to reach out to young people. And it took a while and we were talking about, I'm going off task a little bit, but we're talking about the fact that we've got an aging population in terms of employees. And how are we trying to attract the next generation? Because we're not doing the best job with that. So we actually partnered with Crenshaw High School and thought about, if you are looking for a job, DWP is obviously not your first employer. One, you don't know who we are, what we do. So we asked them to help us with the messaging that was going to be attractive to them, to make them think about us. And I think similarly, something like what you guys have started on is a conversation I'd like to have internally. City procurement being crazy as it is, but again, to at least let them know there are different ways of attacking. We do partner, we do contract with different agencies. They don't reach all. We're really good at getting, for example, Spanish language. That's not the same thing as the many cultures that make up Latinos in Latin America. And never mind talking about the city of LA. For a lot of countries, um, we have the most of their population outside of their home country. And simply put, we don't speak to all of those different people. Will we ever be able to? Probably not, but we can always do better in terms of reaching out. My bigger concern is for those people who come here who don't have an English language partner. Um, and you're coming from another country where we're not putting out material in that particular language. So I don't know what information they're receiving about our services, about the safety of the product we're providing to them. We used to years ago have a gentleman, Pankaj, who has since gone on. He was in a motorcycle accident. But I remember when we first started talking about water issues, and he explained his frustration of people who would go buy the giant 5 gallons of water from a spigot that was attached to the outside of a grocery store without them realizing that's DWP tap water, but you're paying for it. And he would tell them, you do better if your concern is what's coming out of your pipe at home, get a stocking. Run the water through that, the whole notion of filters. But again, because we didn't have a way at that time of communicating with those populations, we didn't speak English or Spanish, but their home country, the water wasn't so great. So they brought those same notions with them to the US. They didn't think they could trust it. So they figured it was easier, safer to buy the water without realizing you're buying what we got already, that you're getting for cents and you're spending dollars.
Wow, that's great, Keisha. I feel like for all the marketing students, you can see how much of an impact words and the way that you actually get something in front of people can have to a whole system, right? So that's amazing feedback. Let's throw it to John for some thoughts, and then maybe get some thoughts from the students on your experience too.
Yeah, sure. When we were working with the water department a few months ago, we found out that the water after the process of cleaning it, it's actually too clean. It's like you have to put some stuff back into it. It's like super clean or hyper clean. Um, I guess I just wouldn't talk about the reclaim part at all. You know, that knee-jerk reaction is so strong with water and toilets. There's at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, which is an interactive science museum, they have a water fountain that's a urinal. So obviously it's clean, normal water, but it's so hard to drink out of that because that reaction is so strong. Um, I really liked, rebranding, like what was it, new something?
New.
Um, yeah, that seems to make sense to me. There's a fish called the orange roughy that was rebranded. It's actually called the slime fish. but nobody would want to eat it, so they rebranded it Orange Roughy, and we've actually it's endangered now because we ate them all. But it's really just a name change, because you'd never eat a slime fish. Um, so that's one thing, is just kind of make it super clean. Don't talk about like where it comes from, because no water is actually, made from scratch, but branded as this hyper pure kind of thing. The other thing we found out is that the water that comes out of the DWP is pristine, right? It's when it gets into the system. So if you live in some crappy old building with bad pipes and you see this brown water come out, you go, you know, screw that Department of Water of LA, they suck. So it's a really challenging problem because DWP can't control what actually comes out of, your faucet at home. So that's a whole nother aspect of it. But I think it's just a super interesting challenge. It's so hard to change human behavior. But we live in a time now, as you're all aware, that we have to be responsible, and we can't just, trash stuff and burn fossil fuels. So we've got to shift, behavior and consumption. So I think this kind of challenge is really critical right now. The other way you could go, I have this friend who started this water company called Liquid Death. And so he went the opposite. Like he just made something so outrageous and crazy and cool. He made the brand so strong that having a name like Liquid Death was actually an asset. So that would be another way to go, is just lean into it, with sewer water, uh, and see if you could make that so compelling and cool that it was actually an advantage. Um, so those are some of my thoughts.
That's awesome, John. I like the idea of a future where we walk on the street and we see a sewer and we say, that's clean. That just like that perception shift is sounds amazing and is totally possible. I would love to see just any of the students, kind of your experience or any kind of initial response to what you're hearing here. Something that kind of stood out to you as you're working on this project would be wonderful.
Oh yeah, for sure. Hello, I'm Peter. I'm one of the students for Sheikah, and I liked how, what was it, John was talking about the how the water was too clean, because I think um the person that was doing the tour was talking about reverse osmosis, I think, and what is it? That was like part of the refinement process of the water, and so. One of the ways that we could actually, make it potable again, because reclaimed water is technically non-potable. Like, it's technically safe to drink, but like, it's unsure. So to make it like potable again, we'd add minerals to it, like calcium, potassium, and all those, minerals that, you know, that you want to make it safe to drink. And we want to, and for our group, we made um like a pamphlet that's some like when you're selling the water and all that, just providing a pamphlet of like all the steps into the post treatment with the minerals, I think would be something that Pando Days can showcase and make something new with reclaimed water.
That's awesome, Peter. I love again that, it's a marketing class, but you just explained water, like the water filtration process, right? And how you can learn this stuff in different contexts. So to me, that's always exciting to see. I don't know if Sydney, if you wanted to share something too.
Yeah, I actually did, but I'm actually a part of She's class as well. So for marketing, I want to bring up what John said, and that was about liquid death. I think that's also like a marketing strategy that a lot of people or people in the marketing space use. So we're specifically for our project, we're targeting people who live in Boyle Heights. So our promotional strategy was just to like empower the community with like cultural centric messages that kind of reflect who they are. So they kind of see that as a way to be educated and also empowered in the same way because a lot of people don't have resources and there's a lack of awareness in that space. So we kind of want to get them exposed to that and also implement social media now just because social media is like such a important factor in marketing right now and I guess in general for a lot of people to kind of like get an array of an audience. So yeah, just like also, I think Shika also brought up that we try to highlight people in like local testimonies. So like people who are um, recognized there. So yeah, that's one of our things that we kind of wanted to bring up. So lack of awareness, how to get that awareness out by educating and empowering the youth and yeah, that was our kind of our main focus and trying to see how we can expand and see how to get people to drink this water. So yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah, really great reflections on this. And again, I think this is something that's transferable to a lot of other issues that we have around the power of marketing or messaging to bring more, authenticity, but also just honesty with people, right? Like, how does this work? And kind of building that understanding as well. So at this point, John or Keisha, do you guys have any other kind of words of wisdom or Lynn, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. I think it's a great project. I really love the way that you were able to frame it within an equity and the lived experience lens. Listening actually to Peter and Sydney, I realized that what I felt I wanted to see was some examples of the branding. And if you have pamphlets or if you have, a campaign like how to be culturally sensitive in Boyle Heights, I think that it would be great if you can include it as part of the assets that you're providing for the website and we can add it to it because, I think you made a really good case, but I'd love to see what came out of it, from the students' work. And then the other thing that I'd like to see, somehow added or, another part or we could talk is next steps. And I think you've heard it from Keisha's response, in how valuable some of this material and perspective is. So what do you see your next steps to be? And so I'd love to either hear them now or see them at least in the material that you provide.
That's great. Thank you, Lynn.
Did
Oh,
we
yeah.
have time, Matthew? I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So yes, so I agree. We have across 16 groups, we have a lot of examples on how that rebranding could happen. Actually, Sydney's group has a targeted campaign they had developed for Boyle Heights itself, but then there are other groups that developed more culturally relevant kind of water-related programming, rebranding, and I'll be happy to put that in the packet when I send it to your way. In terms of next steps, this again, the way it manifested is it came from the students. I introduced the project and the students took it and we started equity related conversations, and then it morphed into, but we can't just market reclaimed water without talking about the nuances, the lived experiences, right? So the next steps is I've already submitted it as a conference paper. So I'm interested in looking at more research in terms of what is discussed. And there is a theoretical term called product contagion, emotional contagion, that kind of limits people's ability to engage with the product despite understanding the scientific process behind it, right? So there is that research component where I'll probably bring in a couple of students to work on it. This could be an ongoing project where students could really drill down into the rebranding aspect of it and then create targeted campaigns for different communities, especially communities that have persistent barriers or inequities. But yes, I'm very happy to sit down and talk more and kind of develop this further.
No, I think it's
If I
great.
can
And I
add a
really,
comment,
I mean,
sorry.
you have two places right off that you can go. The LADWP, a Metropolitan Water Board. I mean, you actually have beyond papers, you have a good strategy and plan.
Awesome. Let's go to Keisha and then we'll wrap it up with Betsy after that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think something that started to come up, and I think it was John who started to bring it up. It's important to also understand, at least from the DWP perspective, we talked about how clean our water is, but the challenge is when it comes out the pipes at the customer's home, and for customers to also understand. I think their responsibility, the responsibility of the landlords, but also to educate them about where the utilities responsibility stops and where theirs picks up. And while I know that for DWP, we've had some issues in South LA and Watts with some of the brown water that's been coming out, not just from us, but from others. And as mentioned, it's not ours, but we want to make sure that customers understand, one, what that could be. I think we're doing some testing down there for them, but to also understand kind of what their resources are. So the difference between, for example, reclaimed water and bad pipes, so that they're not conflating.
Thank you, Keisha. Let's throw it to Betsy.
I just had one little thing to add. In addition to the pamphlets and the other things that you had also mentioned some point in there, including influencers. And I would love to see a video or two of some really cool, important influencer in here splashing around in the reclaimed water or whatever we're going to call it.
I love that. I think you guys might need to work with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on that one. Sorry, that was a risky one. So everybody, we've got to call it. I'm really grateful, Keisha and John, for your time and your insight, and also Lynn and Betsy and Shika and all of the students from the CSU LA team. Thank you very much for the hard work. Our next premiere event will be in just a couple of hours at 3 p.m. This will feature USC and another installation of their amazing test plot initiative. So hopefully y'all can make it to that as well. But for now, thank you for joining, and Pando on.